So another question is, of course, how did we do regarding our sampling procedure? And I think the best way to judge that is comparing the two extreme points of this slide. So the general population and our active panel. Here again, I'm talking about cohort 1, that is the starting population in 2040. Excuse me. And we do this by comparing our values with those which we find in the microcensus of the year in which we sampled our population. And as you see here, actually we didn't do that bad. For example, if you look at the older population, you see a slight divergence here, but yeah, 1.2%, it's okay. The same regarding gender, we have slightly less men than the microcensus. And from our point of view, all those figures are in a region which we can live with. And I mean, we have deviation, which is kind of normal. And actually, I would be alarmed if we would not have it, because that would mean that we did some error in our analysis. So, but we are way beneath 10% in regarding each of those indicators. So, just in a nutshell, again, 6 waves. You also have the months here. I'm not going to read them out. Participants receive for each wave an invitation letter. And here it is important to mention that they receive the invitation letter even if they participate online. Again, the question would be why? And again, it's a very simple answer. We have to get the €5 to them somehow. So they receive an invitation which is mentioning just the starting date of the new wave, also a link, of course, and their €5. And if they are online participants, they also receive an invitation mail so that they can click on the link.
So wait a minute.
Yeah.
You send an invitation letter and €5. The euros are
€5 bills.
They're in the letter.
Yeah. It's a
bill.
It's a bill. It's a €5 bill. And because it's an unconditional incentive, so, but that's also why if they don't participate 3 times, they will not receive any more money from us. So, yeah.
Have you considered sending bitcoins?
There had been some experiments, but actually, if you're interested in this, I would have to put you in contact with a colleague of mine. I think in the welcome survey, they experimented also with some kind of vouchers, but yeah, that's what we decided to do, to use the prepaid incentive. And yeah, so online receive money and the letter, and the offline participants receive pretty much the same thing, plus the questionnaire in paper and an envelope, of course, to return the questionnaire. We also have 2 reminders which are sent out, but they are sent out only online. So actually the offline population is not reminded because this would basically be too cost incentive. Yeah, the rest I already told you. Maybe the last point is still important. We publish our data roughly 2 months after the end of the field period. So we try to do this really quick, and there's an important point if you decide to send your survey to us, the feature survey with us. The last thing is, I think, the most important, not the most important, but it is important to know. There is no embargo. This means the moment you get the data, everybody else is getting the data. So if you're planning to field a study with us, you will have the data the same time all your colleagues. So we want you to be creative, but plan to do your analysis quick if you want to be quicker than anybody else.
So basically you have to write first the theoretical part of the paper, hypothesis, everything else, and then you get the data, and in 2 days after that you submit it.
Yeah, basically. But you have some time for that. I will come to it later on, because of course our process also takes some time. So it's just an early warning, keep it in mind. Yeah, and with that, we actually come to the data collection part. If there are any questions up until now, just let me know. No? Okay. Data collection. So imagine you have a really nice creative idea for a study and you want to do it in Germany. Then an important question, of course, is which kind of study can we accommodate? So in this picture, you have different waves over time, 20 minutes each. The first and most obvious thing we can, of course, do is are single wave studies. So you can come up with a cross-sectional design. You want specific questions to be asked to our panelists at one point in time. So that is what we have in each wave, single wave studies. But then, of course, there are multiple wave and longitudinal studies, which are really taking advantage of the panel structure. And they are logically also possible. So a first variation of that would be multiple cross-sectional studies, which basically means you have a study which has several waves, but you ask mostly different questions in those waves. And the other type of longitudinal study would be a real panel study. And here, actually, this picture ain't that good in this regard, because usually you would not do the two waves directly following each other. So this is the situation where you ask mostly identical questions or absolutely identical questions in two or more different waves. There are, I think that's also important at this point, no constraints to the number of waves. As long as you can convince us and the reviewers that there's some value in your study, you can do it. So, yeah, what else do we have? Yeah, that's a very important point. We asked everyone who submits a study to us to use the whole sample. So you cannot do any kind of subsample studies. You have to field questions which are, at least in theory, relevant to the whole sample. You cannot just say that you're, for example, only interested in the onliners, because what would we do with the offliners, or just in the women and not in the men? That doesn't work. So you have always to use the whole sample. And this can be a bit tricky, I know. Yeah, so, going a step further. You now have your idea, you have it developed in your mind. The next thing you should do to get it in our panel is go to our submission website. And this is the part which is actually starting to look a lot like a journal. And actually also our interface is used by journalists, so it should not be that unfamiliar to most of you. And I hope it works. Let's just see whether it also works in practice. It should be okay. Should be the very same thing. Yeah, so that's exactly what you see. And the first part of the web page of the submission site you want to visit is that one, how to submit, because you have a number of very important documents. So very important are, if you're thinking about submitting, the first one, so that's explaining our submission procedure. Our style guide is also very, very important, because we actually asked you to implement your instrument already in UniPark. I'm going to come back to that in a second. And you also are informed about our review criteria. And as you can see, the website is in English, and all the documents, for example, let's just see the style guide, that's what you get, are in English too. So that's not a problem. If you want to submit your study, you don't have to do it in German. Actually, you have to do it in English because our reviewers are also international and they don't speak German. A lot of that don't. So in our style guide, for example, you are told which kind of questions are allowed and what they should look like once you have programmed them. Shall I just stop for a second?
No. Go. The camera stop.
Okay. Yeah. So let's go back to the presentation. Where are we? That one. Okay. So yeah, you have decided what you want to do. You take a look in this 3 documents, or hopefully in all the documents, or also the other ones, but those are the most important ones. And I want to point out some of the most important points and criteria you have to follow and you have to take into consideration. So first of all, we are fielding only scientific projects. We do not field commercial projects, and actually you're not allowed to use our data in commercial projects in any way. I already told you that our data is freely available. This also means that all fielded measurements instruments are freely available. And this is something which is, for example, quite important to psychologists, because sometimes they use instruments which are governed by some kind of copyright reglementation. So you can only submit to us what you are allowed to use. And that's something you have to make sure of, because we cannot judge it. But you have to sign an agreement, and if anybody is coming to us later on and saying, yeah, why did you publish that instrument without paying royalties to us, we would send them your way. So check that, please. I already told you no cohort or subsample studies. Important here is that we use the offline mode as the least common denominator. This means you can do everything I should rephrase that. In theory, because I don't know how creative you are and what you come up with. In theory, you can do what you are able to do in paper also online, but not the other way around. Simple example, you cannot include any kind of video or audio stimuli in the online survey because we cannot do that offline. That's basically what it means. And each submitted study can take up to 5 minutes maximum.